Have you ever stopped to think who really lives next door to you? That person who waves to you every morning. Do you really know them? What if I told you that the most dangerous threat in your life isn't hiding in the shadows of a dark street, but rather on the other side of your bedroom wall? What would you do if you found out that your neighbor, that friendly guy who always greets you, has terrible plans for you? And even worse, what would you do if you realized this too late, when you were already locked inside his house? My name is Detective Marcus Chen. I'm 26 years old and I've only been a police officer for 2 years. I work at the Millbrook Police Department, a quiet town in rural Oregon, or at least I thought it was quiet. What I'm about to tell you are 3 911 calls I answered in the last 6 months. 3 cases that made me question everything I thought I knew about safety, about peaceful neighborhoods, and especially about the human capacity to hide monstrosities behind a friendly smile. These 3 calls completely changed my perspective on the world. And after you hear what I have to say, yours will change too. Because after those experiences, I learned one thing. Monsters don't live under the bed. They live next door. And the worst part, they have the keys to your house. Case 1, Todd's dinner. It was a September night, around 8:15 p.m. I was in the patrol car with veteran Dan Morrison when we received the call. A young male voice, clearly panicked. He said he had just escaped from a neighbor's house and needed urgent help. The address was on Pinewood Avenue, one of those outlying residential neighborhoods where the houses are quite far apart. A place you look at and think, wow, what peace, what tranquility. Morrison drove fast, but didn't turn on the siren. That was his experience. If the guy's still around, he said, we don't want to let him know we're coming. When we arrived, we found the young man sitting on his porch. He must have been about 24 or 25 years old. His shirt was torn, his hands were trembling, sweat was dripping down his forehead even though it was a cold night. His name was Eric Walsh. Officer, I need to tell you what happened, he said, his voice still trembling. Morrison made that calm gesture that veterans make. Take a deep breath, son. Tell us everything from the beginning. And that's when Eric started telling a story that sent chills down my spine. Eric had moved into that house just a week ago. He worked as a graphic designer and could do everything remotely, so he decided to look for a quieter place, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. I thought I'd found paradise, he said with a bitter laugh. A simple little house, a calm, quiet neighborhood, perfect for concentrating on my work. A few days after the move, a neighbor showed up, Todd Brenner, a tall man, probably around 50 years old, with black hair and a few gray strands, a medium-length, uneven beard, friendly manner, broad smile. He came to welcome me, Eric continued. He said he'd lived there for over 10 years with his wife, Sarah. He said it was great to have new people in the neighborhood. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, you know. In the following days, Eric settled in. But one thing bothered him. He never saw anyone. The streets were always deserted. No neighbors on their balconies, no cars passing by, no dogs barking. It was as if he were the only living being in that place. I started to find it strange, Eric said. But then I thought, well, maybe everyone works during the day. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Then, on Thursday, around 4 p.m., Todd showed up again. He said he was having dinner that night at 7:30 p.m. at his house. Several neighbors would be there. A perfect opportunity for me to meet everyone. Eric swallowed hard. I hesitated for a second. But then I thought it would be great to finally meet the people here. So I accepted. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Eric got ready and walked to Todd's house. It was only 3 houses away. The neighborhood was completely dark and silent. Not a single car was parked on the street. No lights were on in any house except Todd's. That was already giving me a bad feeling, Eric said, rubbing his hands nervously. But I thought, well, maybe I'll be the first to arrive. When he arrived at Todd's house, the front door was ajar. Eric knocked, but no one answered. He knocked again, harder. Come in, Make yourself at home. Todd's voice echoed from somewhere inside the house. Eric pushed open the door and went inside. The house was extremely dimly lit. A few low-wattage lamps cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. The silence was unsettling. No music, no conversation, no sound of movement. I expected to hear voices, laughter, the sound of people talking, Eric said, his voice growing more tense. But there was nothing, just that dead silence. He walked down the hall to the kitchen, where Todd's voice had come from. But when he got there, the kitchen was empty, no sign of Todd. No sign of food being prepared, no dishes on the table, nothing. Todd, Eric called, the voice echoing through the house. Silence. Sarah. Nothing. It was at that moment that Eric realized there was no one else there. There was no dinner. There were no neighbors. There was no Sarah. It was a trap. And then, slam! The front door slammed shut so hard it made the walls shake. Eric screamed in fright and ran back into the hallway. The front door was locked. He ran to it, grabbed the doorknob, locked. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to have a heart attack, Eric said, his eyes wide as he relived the moment. I looked at the door and saw there were 3 different locks. 3, as if he had specifically set everything up to prevent anyone from leaving. And that's when he heard it. Steps, slow, deliberate, coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. Eric! Todd's voice was low, almost a whisper. Where are you going, Eric? The steps became faster. Eric, the night has barely begun. Eric panicked completely. His hands were shaking so much he could barely hold the locks. First lock, unlocked. Second, unlocked. The third was stiff, rusty. Eric! Todd's voice was now a shout. Where do you think you're going? Footsteps were rushing down the hallway now. Eric could hear Todd's heavy breathing approaching. He pulled hard on the third lock. Click! The door opened. Eric ran out, tripping over his own feet, rushing down the porch. He glanced back for a split second and saw Todd standing in the doorway. His face now completely different. There was no longer a friendly smile, just a cold, empty, predatory expression. I ran home without looking back, Eric said. As soon as I got inside, I locked all the doors and windows and called you. But the story didn't end there. While I was waiting for you guys to arrive, Eric continued, his voice trembling, I heard knocking on my door. I looked out the window and saw Todd standing on my balcony. He was peering through the windows, trying to see me inside the house. He stood there for, I don't know, 5 minutes, until you guys arrived and he left. Morrison and I exchanged a look. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was premeditated. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Todd, Morrison said. We walked to Todd's house. Morrison knocked on the door with that authority that only veterans possess. Todd opened the door with a friendly smile, as if nothing had happened. Officers, how can I help you? Mr. Brenner, Morrison began. We received a call about an incident that happened here tonight. Incident? Todd made a confused, almost convincing expression. I don't know what you're talking about. The young man who lives 3 houses down said that the man invited him to a dinner that never happened. He said he was locked in his house. Todd chuckled. Oh, that kid. He must be confused. I actually invited him to meet some neighbors, but he didn't show up. I thought he'd changed his mind. He said that he entered his house and that the door closed, locking him inside. Well, the front door has a problem with the mechanism. Sometimes it slams shut on its own because of the wind, but it was never locked. If he had tried to turn the doorknob, he would have gotten out easily. It was all very plausible, very well rehearsed. And where is your wife, Sarah? I asked. Todd looked at me. For a split second, something changed in his eyes. Something cold. My wife? Yes. You told Eric that you lived here with your wife, Sarah. There was a long pause. A very long one. Officers, Todd said finally. I've lived here alone for 12 years. My stomach turned to ice. I've never been married. Morrison immediately changed his stance. Mr. Brenner, are you saying you never mentioned a wife named Sarah to the young man? Absolutely not. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. Morrison knew it was a lie. But we had no proof. Mr. Brenner, Morrison said, his voice now more serious, we're going to need to take a look at your house. Certainly, Todd said, opening the door completely. Make yourselves at home. We went inside. The house was normal, clean, organized, nothing out of place. We checked all the rooms, nothing suspicious, but as we were leaving, I noticed something on the kitchen door frame. There were fresh fingernail marks, as if someone had scratched desperately trying to get out. Mr. Brenner, I said, pointing to the marks. What is this? Todd looked calmly. Ah, my cat. He likes to scratch at the doors. Do you have a cat? He had it. He passed away 2 weeks ago. There was no trace that a cat had ever lived there. No food bowl, no toys, no fur, but again, without concrete proof. We left Todd's house and went back to Eric's. Unfortunately, Morrison explained, we haven't been able to find anything to prove there was an attempted kidnapping or arrest. No witnesses, no physical evidence. It's his word against his. Eric turned pale. But he lied about his wife. He invited me to a dinner that didn't exist. He locked me inside his house. I believe you, Morrison said, and he genuinely seemed to believe him. But legally, we can't do anything right now. The door could have slammed shut on its own. The locks could have been accidentally engaged. There's no proof it was intentional. So what do I do? My advice, Morrison said seriously, move away from here as fast as you can. This guy, he's not normal, but without more evidence, our hands are tied. Eric moved 3 days later, and Todd was never arrested. I search his system from time to time. To this day, he still lives in that house. And to this day, I wonder how many other people received invitations to dinners that never happened. Case 2, The Observer. 3 months after Todd's case, Morrison and I received another call, 2:37 a.m., home invasion in progress. This time, it was in a neighborhood closer to the city center. A typical residential area, middle-class houses, well-lit, close neighbors. The kind of place where you think you're safe. The victim was a 28-year-old man named James Rutherford, who works in IT. When we arrived, he was sitting on the porch with a baseball bat in his hands, his eyes wide open, completely in shock. He was in my house, James said, as soon as we got out of the car. He was inside my house. Who was there? Morrison asked. My neighbor, the guy who lives across the street. Another neighbor. James told us that he had moved into that house about a year ago. Everything had been completely normal until 6 weeks ago, when a new resident moved into the house across from his. At first, I didn't think much of it, James said. Just a new guy in the neighborhood. I saw him unloading some stuff from a U-Haul truck. He seemed normal. But then, strange things started to happen. One night, I came home from work and saw him standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. Not walking, not doing anything, just standing there, looking at my house. James thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the guy was just enjoying the neighborhood. But when he got out of the car to greet him, the neighbor simply walked away. I thought it was strange, but I kind of forgot about it. The next day, James was picking up the mail when he casually glanced at the house across the street. That's when he saw the shutters on the second-story window moving, and for a split second, he saw an eye, a single eye, staring directly at him through a small opening in the shutters. I pretended I didn't see it, James said, but that image, that eye, stayed in my head all day. In the following weeks, the situation worsened. Whenever James looked at his neighbor's house, he saw that eye, always watching, always attentive. I started to feel paranoid, James admitted. Like, am I imagining things? Is the guy really watching me, or am I going crazy? But then came the night that changed everything. James had worked late. He arrived home around 9:30 p.m., completely exhausted. He ate a quick dinner, watched Netflix for an hour, and went to bed at 11 p.m. I was so tired that I passed out almost instantly, he said, but at 2 a.m. he woke up. It wasn't a gradual awakening. It was sudden, violent, as if his body had sensed danger and forced him to wake up. I sat up in bed with my heart racing, James said, his voice trembling. My whole body was sweating cold. I didn't know why I was awake, but something inside me was screaming that something was wrong. The room was silent. The lights were off, just as he had left them. But that feeling of being watched, was overwhelming. James turned on the bedside lamp and looked around. Nothing out of place. Bedroom door closed, windows closed, everything normal. But I just couldn't get rid of that feeling. He sat on the bed for a few minutes, just listening. And that's when he realized there was a sound, very soft, almost imperceptible, a creaking sound, as if someone were moving slowly down the hallway outside the room. James' blood ran cold. I live alone, he said, his eyes staring intently at me. There shouldn't be anyone in my hallway. He froze, not knowing what to do. Part of him wanted to believe he was imagining things, but that creaking, it continued, slow, deliberate. James quietly got out of bed and went to the door. His room had one of those old doors with a small crack at the bottom. He knelt down and looked underneath. The hallway was dark, but he could see the moonlight coming through the living room window. And then he saw a shadow, 2 feet in dark boots, standing on the other side of the door. Someone was there, outside her room, just waiting. I almost had a breakdown right there, James said, his voice breaking. And I covered my mouth with my hands to keep from screaming. The creaking stopped instantly. Whoever was on the other side knew that James was awake. There was a moment of absolute silence, and then the feet moved quickly, straight to the door. James jumped back, moving away, and then he heard a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Scratch, fingernails scratching the wooden door, slowly, methodically, and then a voice. Load your horse, whispering through the door. James, I know you're awake. James recognized the voice immediately. It was the neighbor. I can hear your heart beating. James. The scratches continued, faster now. James grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911, his hands trembling. He whispered to the dispatcher that there was an intruder in his house and that he needed immediate help. Is the door locked, James? The dispatcher asked. It was only then that James realized he always locked his bedroom door before going to sleep. It was a habit. But that night, he looked at the doorknob. Destrancada. I don't remember forgetting to lock it, James told us. I always lock it. But that night, somehow, it was open. From the other side of the door, the voice continued. You forgot to lock your door tonight, James. That was so careless of you. And then James realized something even more terrifying. If he knew my door was unlocked, James said, his eyes wide, that means he'd already checked. He'd already turned the doorknob to test it while I was sleeping. The scratching stopped. Feet moved away from the door. For a moment, James thought he had gone away. But then he heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor. And he realized his neighbor wasn't running away. He was positioning himself. He lay down on the floor, James said, his voice almost a whisper. I could see his shadow spreading out under the door. And then he put his face to the floor and looked under the door. James stepped back until his face was against the wall. He was looking directly into his neighbor's eyes through that narrow crack under the door. A wide smile, teeth gleaming in the darkness. Hi, James. That's when we heard the sirens. Our patrol car was approaching. The shadow vanished instantly. James heard footsteps running down the hallway, down the stairs, the sound of the back door opening, and silence. When we entered James's house, the intruder had already fled, but we found evidence that he had indeed been there. The back door was unlocked. There were muddy footprints in the hallway, and on the door to James's bedroom, deep scratches in the wood, Morrison examined the back door. Oh, it wasn't forced open. It was unlocked with a key. How did he get a key? I asked. That's the million-dollar question, Morrison replied. We went to the house across the street. We knocked on the door several times. No answer. We looked out the windows. The house seemed empty. No furniture. Nothing. He fled, Morrison said. He probably knew we called the police and got out before we arrived. We conducted a thorough investigation. We discovered that the neighbor had rented that house 6 weeks prior. The contract was in the name of Michael Sanders, a false name, as we later discovered. The real estate agency had never properly verified his identity, and when we investigated Michael Sanders, we found something disturbing. He had a history, 3 prior stalking charges in other states, all involving young men who lived alone. He would move into houses near the victims, observe them for weeks, and eventually break into their homes. What did he do when he went in? I asked the detective who was giving us the information. He just observed. He would stay in their houses, watching them sleep, sometimes for hours. He never stole anything. He never touched anyone. He just observed. That's psychopathic, I said. Yes, and the worst part, he was never imprisoned for very long. The victims couldn't prove he had bad intentions. He always said he was just visiting, or that he entered by mistake. And since he never stole or physically assaulted anyone, the judges handed down light sentences. My stomach churned. But this case is different, the detective continued. This time, we have a 911 recording, physical evidence, and a clear witness. If we can catch him, he won't get away so easily. Because to this day, Michael Sanders has never been found. He completely disappeared, and I'm absolutely certain that somewhere he's doing it again. Case 3, the owner. The third case happened just a month ago. This time it was an apartment downtown, a small building, only 6 units. Morrison had taken the night off, so I was with a new recruit named Officer Amanda Torres. The call came in at 9:45 p.m. It was an assault with a bladed weapon. The victim managed to disarm the assailant. When we arrived, we found the victim, a 27-year-old woman named Rachel Kim, a high school teacher, sitting on the building stairs. She had blood on her arm and was holding a kitchen towel pressed against a cut. She tried to kill me, Rachel said as soon as she saw us. My landlady, she broke into my apartment and tried to kill me. The owner, identified as Margaret Holloway, 46 years old, was handcuffed inside Rachel's apartment, being guarded by another officer who had arrived before us. Tell me what happened, I said to Rachel while Torres called an ambulance. Rachel had moved into that apartment 3 months earlier. It was perfect for her. Close to the school where she worked, affordable price, quiet neighborhood. The owner, Margaret, also lived in the building, in the apartment across from hers on the top floor. At first, everything seemed normal, Rachel explained. Margaret was kind of strange, very quiet, expressionless, but nothing that seemed dangerous, just different. But then things started to get weird. On Rachel's first full day in the apartment, she was leaving for work when she found Margaret standing outside her door. And she was just standing there, Rachel said, looking at my door. When she saw me, she asked something very strange. Is this the time you normally leave for work? Rachel found the question intrusive, but tried to be polite. I said I wasn't sure yet because I was starting a new job. Margaret didn't answer. She simply turned and went into her apartment, slamming the door. It was strange. But I thought, well, maybe she's just socially awkward. The following morning, Rachel was woken at 6 a.m. by loud knocking on the door. When she opened the door, still sleepy and confused, Margaret was there. Same blank expression, same monotonous voice. Do you want to come to my apartment after work today? Rachel was completely confused. After work, I'll be really tired. Margaret didn't answer. She just turned around, went back to her apartment, and slammed the door. It was so weird, Rachel said. Like Who invites someone to their house at 6 in the morning? The following night, the same thing happened. Margaret knocked on Rachel's door again at 6 a.m., made the same invitation and left when Rachel refused. This happened 4 days in a row. On the 5th day, I was afraid to open the door, Rachel admitted, but it kept banging and banging and banging for 10 minutes straight. I had no choice. When Rachel finally opened the door, Margaret extended the same invitation, but this time, Rachel gave a different excuse. I said maybe another time, that I was too busy with work. Margaret stood there for a long moment, and then, for the first time, she smiled. It was the fakest, most unsettling smile Rachel had ever seen. "All right," Margaret said, and left. Rachel thought it was finally over. But that night, when she returned from work at 7 p.m, she noticed something strange. Her door was unlocked. "I always lock my door," Rachel said, her eyes wide with the same look I'd seen on James weeks before. "Always. It's not something I forget." She entered cautiously. Everything seemed normal, nothing out of place, nothing stolen. But when she went to her room, the bedroom door was open. She always left it closed. "I knew someone had been there," Rachel said. "I could feel it." She checked every corner of the apartment, under the bed, inside the closets, behind the curtains. Nothing. But when she went to bed that night, she locked her bedroom door. This brings us to the night of the attack. Rachel had worked late, grading papers. She only got home at 9:15 p.m. As always, she checked to see if the front door was locked. It was. She ate dinner quickly and went to bed at 10 p.m. "I was exhausted," Rachel said. "I fell asleep almost immediately." But something woke her up. Not a sound, not a movement, a presence. "I opened my eyes," Rachel said, her voice now almost a whisper, and she was there. Margaret, standing beside Rachel's bed, in the dark, just staring down. Rachel screamed and rolled out of bed, falling to the other side. She turned on the bedside lamp, and that's when she saw it. Margaret was holding a kitchen knife. "My brain went into survival mode," Rachel said. "I didn't think, I just reacted." Margaret stepped forward. Rachel dodged, grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy hardcover book, and struck Margaret's arm with all her might. The knife fell to the floor. The two women lunged to grab it, but Raquel was faster. She grabbed the knife and pointed it at Margaret. "Get out!" Rachel shouted. "Get out now!" Margaret didn't move. She just stood there with that same blank, emotionless expression. "You should have come when I invited you," Margaret said, her voice completely calm, as if she were commenting on the weather. "I told you to get out. I did everything to be friendly. I gave you so many chances." Rachel realized that Margaret wasn't going to leave voluntarily, and she needed to get out of that room. She ran to the door, still holding the knife, but when he tried to open the front door, the doorknob was stuck, in a way she'd never seen before, as if someone had changed the lock mechanism. She had planned everything, Rachel realized, her eyes filling with tears. She had changed my lock to lock me inside. She had copies of my keys. She had entered my apartment while I was at work to prepare everything. That's when Rachel managed to unlock the door and run outside, screaming for help. A neighbor downstairs heard her and called the police. When we questioned Margaret, she was completely calm, no remorse, no fear. "Why did you do that?" I asked. "I wanted to be friendly," she said in that monotone voice. "I invited her to my apartment. She refused every time. She was very rude. So you decided to break in with a knife?" I just wanted her to understand that when I make an invitation, I expect it to be accepted. It was madness. Complete madness. We investigated Margaret's history. We discovered that she had a serious mental disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, and had not been taking medication for more than 6 months. Her family had tried to have her hospitalized several times, but she always escaped from the hospitals. And the worst part, This wasn't the first incident. 3 years earlier, she had attacked another tenant for rejecting her friendship. But the case never went to trial because she was declared mentally incompetent. This time, however, she was arrested. Rachel had injuries, physical evidence, and witnesses. There was no way Margaret could escape. She's in a maximum security psychiatric institution now, and I hope she never leaves again. 3 cases, 3 neighbors. 3 carefully planned traps. Since then, I haven't looked at the neighborhood the same way. Those beautiful houses with white picket fences and well-kept gardens. I wonder what's going on inside them. That friendly neighbor who always waves at you. I wonder what he really wants, because the truth is this. We never really know the people around us. We only pretend to know them. We see what they allow us to see, but behind the closed curtains, behind the locked doors, who knows what lies hidden? Todd still lives in that house. He still invites people over for dinners that never happen. Michael Sanders is still out there somewhere, still watching, still waiting. And how many others like them are there? How many friendly neighbors are hiding dark secrets? The answer terrifies me, probably more than I'd like to believe. So, the next time you hear a knock on the door late at night, the next time you feel like you're being watched, the next time your neighbor makes an invitation that seems a little too strange, trust your instincts, because sometimes monsters don't live in the shadows, they live in the house next door. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn about more terrifying police cases that have never been publicly released, don't forget to check out the link to my ebook in the pinned comments. In the ebook, 911 Calls, the cases the police try to forget, you will find 15 real cases, emergency calls that ended in terror, detailed accounts from police officers, paramedics, and 911 dispatchers, stories never before revealed to the public, cases of home invasions, chases, and supernatural encounters. The ebook is on special discount this week. Click the link in the pinned comments and download now to access even more terrifying stories than the ones you just heard. Because believe me, what you heard today was just the tip of the iceberg. The worst stories, the ones that really keep police officers up at night, are waiting for you in this ebook. Link in the pinned comments. Don't miss it.